What's up, guys? This is John with What Do You Meme, and I'm sitting here with Robert Spencer. This is a unannounced, live, spontaneous Q&A. So, if anybody's online, go ahead and let us know where you're from. See a couple people. It's my first time using this live stream too, so
Is anyone here?
is anyone there?
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen.
Chicago, WH Low. I see you comment here and there. Get a read from you. Everybody, okay. Lebanon, Australia.
Excellent.
Guess all over. Hey, what's up, super user? Hey, man, I always like reading your comments. Man of God, hello. Daniel, what's up? New Zealand, cool. Yo. So, you guys, if you guys have any questions for me or Robert Spencer, now's your chance. So right now we're recording our big project, the Islamicize Me project that David Wood's been talking about, and we've been slammed. We're struggling to try to get it all done, and right now they're recording another scene, so we have just a little bit here to chat with you guys. And after this, hopefully we're going to be able to get onto David Wood's channel and do live as well, maybe with him and Vocab Malone and stuff, but we're not sure because we have just so much to do, and we're all leaving town to head back tomorrow. So, all right, Atlanta. Tommy, what's up, man? Listen, I write an article here. Okay. Or are you slammed? We're slammed because we have 30 videos to record in like four or 5 days, and it's just a lot of stuff's taking a lot longer than we thought it would, and so it's really tough. But it's so dope. So if we do get this all, we're gonna get it done. But if we can get it all done like in this trip, and we'll have it up for you guys soon, it's gonna be really, really good. I mean, we're all proud of it. So, all right. I've been reading your books, Robert. True observation. What books are you reading? Yo, Robert, I'm doing a poster on Islam polemics and wanted to see if you had some great quotes from scholars that damage the truth of Islam.
The best thing to damage the truth of Islam is to quote their own scholars, quote their own books, quote the Quran, quote chapter 32, verse 13 of the Quran that says, Allah, if he had willed, could have brought everybody to the truth, but instead he's going to fill hell with jinns and men. What kind of a God would do that? And so, I like quoting them. Quote their stuff. Quote Muhammad.
Good. And says, does ISIS consider most westernized Muslims apostates?
Yes.
I would assume so.
Yes, they do. Although ISIS is more aware of the fact that there are certain exigencies involved, that there are people living in the West who are trying to bring about the caliphate in Sharia. And a lot of people in ISIS are aware of that, and aware that there is a deception operation going on. I love the question here somebody has, if I see that right. Which ending would I prefer?
Yeah. Well, either way it works out, right?
Yes.
If we kill you, you go to heaven. But if we don't kill you, then you still live. So either way, you still live.
Yeah. That's the story. But the Quran says he's going to fill the Kharijites, the people who rejected both Ali and Muawiyah. Ali and Muawiyah. Ali was the fourth caliph, the last of the so-called rightly guided caliphs, the Islamic golden age from 632 to 661. And Muawiyah in 658 challenged his caliphate, and they fought several battles actually. But the Khawarij were angry with both of them for saying that they were saying that they were sinners, and consequently neither one of them was the caliph, and trying to put themselves forward to gain the authority was evidence enough of it. So anyway, the Khawarij are often compared to modern day jihad groups by people like the Saudi rulers who have their own reasons to fight Al-Qaeda and so on. But they actually evolved into the Ibadis of Oman, which is actually not very much like the Khawarij anymore at all, and not that much of a martial or jihad-oriented group or outlook, you could say, on Islam. although certainly it's not as if they've renounced any of these doctrines. But you don't often hear, if you think about it, you don't often hear about people from Oman or Ibadi Muslims waging jihad or getting involved in terrorism, which is not to say that it's not present there. There are brotherhood elements there, of course, as there are everywhere. And so that's not a universal statement, but they do have generally not taken that route.
Cool. Daniel, man of God, you say there's a lot of people that criticize people for criticizing Islam,
Yes.
particularly online, especially non-Muslims. Any idea why?
Of course, it's a tactic.
Yeah,
it's a tool. See, because look, if you are not a jihadi, but you are a Muslim and you want caliphate, you want Sharia, but you also have sense enough to know that you don't go around saying that in the United States because it will get people's guard up. So instead, you clear away all the obstacles to it. You clear away all the opposition to jihad, all the opposition to the imposition of Sharia. How do you do that? You take everyone who says anything about it and you say, look, they're racists. They're just greedy, profit-oriented, evil, cynical people who don't even believe what they're saying. They're just in it for the money. And you turn everybody away from them. And anytime anybody says anything about it, you say, oh, look, that's Islamophobia. And make everyone more afraid of being Islamophobic than afraid of jihad terror or of Sharia oppression. Yeah. And so all obstacles are cleared away to jihad terror and Sharia oppression.
That's good. And one thing I notice is anybody that, Muslims constantly, and I noticed this with a lot of different views and stuff, if they don't like what you're saying, they're going to just say that you're a liar, right? So there's like two tactics. They're going to say you're evil, you're a liar, this, or they're going to say that you're Islamophobe, or they're going to try to do something to harm you, right? So either way, it comes down to some way to try to suppress what people are saying, which I think is interesting.
That's right, John. And one of the things you don't find them doing very often is saying, well, he says this and it's not true because of this and this and this.
Yeah.
And if they do, they often are using very highly selective arguments that ignore or gloss over the unpleasant aspects of Islam. One example of that is Qasim Rashid, who is the Ahmadi Muslim spokesman in the U.S. and very nasty guy. And he wrote an article when ISIS, when the Islamic State took all the sex slaves. And he wrote an article in which he said Muhammad would have hated this, and this is terrible. But he never quoted once the Quran's verses about the sex slaves. He just relied on people not knowing that they're there.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's where we see so much of that, right? Like,
oh yeah.
Yeah, I mean, and I just wrote a video for this, and I'll probably be recording it sometime when I get back from all this. But the main three objections that I get over and over and over from Muslims constantly on my channel, I'm doing a video for those, and they're pretty easy to refute too. That's why it's so insane. But what's crazy to me is that like Muslims will. They hardly, it seems like they've never heard responses to these, or, I mean, I'm hoping that's it, and they're not just repeating, but typically it's, how did your God die, right? Your God, some variation of that, your God died on a cross, blah, blah, or 1 + 1 + 1 = 1, not 3, Christians fail at math, or what's the third one? The third most popular is, the Bible's been corrupted. Those are the three, pretty much the main three that I'd say over 90% of my comments from Muslims are. And so I'll be doing a video on that soon too. So, and me and Robert today recorded a few videos too. So you guys will see those in the upcoming months here too. And
I see the one about out of context.
Yeah.
There's a lot of interesting stuff about that in the first place, the Quran is one of the least contextual books in the whole universe. If you read the Quran, it just changes the subject without notice. It refers to incidents without explaining them. It acts as if you must know the story, and so it doesn't fill in the whole story. It's there's not a whole lot of context in that. Right. But even if you are not familiar with the Asbab al-Nuzul, these circumstances of the revelation that you can get in the Hadith, even if you're not familiar with that, you can say, look, if I'm taking this out of context, why is it that so many Muslims take this out of context? Right. Why is it that if it's really all peace, and there's no jihad fighting anywhere in the Quran against unbelievers, then how come so many Muslims are misunderstanding that and fighting jihad against unbelievers? And so, just to say,
and why is it Islamophobia if you say it, but it's not whenever other people say it, right?
And the other thing about context is you can say, well, what exactly is good context for kill them wherever you find them? Where is it that, how is it that you can, give me a context where you can say that and it really means give them a hug.
Right.
Anyway, the Birmingham Quran, that's a very interesting thing because the dating of that manuscript, for people who don't know, there was this manuscript that's in Birmingham in the UK that was discovered. It wasn't discovered in Birmingham. It's on display in Birmingham, of the Quran that people were saying, there was a lot of publicity about it. People were saying this could have been written by Muhammad himself, or it could have been Muhammad's own copy. It dates back that far. But actually the dating said that it was dated from about 575 to about 650. Now, Muhammad died in 632. In 575, he was 5 years old. And so he didn't have any Quran until 610 when he got the first revelation. So if the Birmingham Quran could have dated from before Muhammad began to be a prophet, then that explodes Islam altogether. Because you see, a lot of scholars have already shown that the Quran is made up of a mixture of texts that are earlier, that were adapted. And I show in my book, Did Muhammad Exist? A lot of the Quran comes from an Aramaic Christian text that was altered and made to say what the Quran says. So the Birmingham Quran actually only confirms what I say in the book, that the Quran may predate Islam because it was something that pre-existed that was adapted for use when Islam was being put together. You got to read the book to see. Did Muhammad Exist? Run, Don't Walk, available now at any self-respecting bookstore and at Amazon.com.
Okay. Oh, actually, where's that one I saw? I saw something. I'm
old. I can't see him.
Yeah, I know. It's really small, by the way. So, Brittany, you said thanks for your comment on the Abadis.
The Abadis.
Yeah. You said, how do you deal with the peaceful Muslim who thinks that the more violent interpretation isn't the real interpretation? And this is interesting because I have a really good friend who's is working towards being a Muslim scholar, and he's a Shia. And me and him have been having a lot of conversations. I've been reading over his dissertation, and he explained to me how he can interpret the Quran differently and stuff like that. So I guess I'm kind of curious about this question as well, I guess.
Well, I would go back to Muhammad in both cases. And the biographical data about Muhammad that is the earliest available, and it was all written by pious Muslims, it all makes it very clear that Muhammad, even though you hear a lot about his talking about the greater jihad that's of the spirit, he actually very clearly understood jihad to mean warfare against unbelievers. He talks about the spoils of war. There's no spoils from a spiritual struggle. And you can also show that in the Quran, that there's a whole chapter, Al-Anfal, chapter 8, the spoils of war. Well, what spoils of war result from a interior spiritual struggle? Why do you have to, how do you give 20% of your interior spiritual struggle, as the Quran directs, to Muhammad, the Quran says, and ISIS and those groups understand it to mean that you got to give 20% of the war booty to the Muslim leader? How do you do that for a spiritual struggle? So it's very clear from the Quran and from the example of Muhammad that warfare is meant. I'm glad that Ibadis are not waging jihad, but the texts are actually pretty clear.
All right. Let's see what else we got here. The devil, you are going to get banned if you don't stop posting 666 stuff. I will block you off of here. No time for the trolls. No time for the trolls. All right. Let's see what else. Whenever someone brings a good evidence against Islam and Muhammad, then Islamist says it's Zionist agenda.
Yeah, well, that's excuses, you know?
Yeah.
I mean, come on. Deal substantively with the objection.
Yeah.
Everybody's Jewish, everybody's a Zionist. If you say anything remotely critical about Islam or the Quran or Muhammad, it's really ridiculous.
Agreed. All right.
And of course, it's Quranic, because the Quran says that the Jews are the worst enemies of the Muslims. So if somebody tells you that you're Jewish or you're a Zionist when you're really nothing of the kind, then it shows that you're getting to them. And so they identify you with the people the Quran says are their worst enemies.
Cool. Kendra says, I spoke with a Salafi Muslim today, and he kept saying that we should accept Sharia because it will create a moral society. Can you respond to this? And thank you for your work.
The Quran and Sharia, I should say Sharia because, of course, Sharia comes from the Quran and Sunnah. Sharia creates not a moral society. It creates the appearance of a moral society. It creates an empire of fear in which people are afraid to do what is right. Now, if you look at Christianity, Christianity is very different. It says that you should do what is good, not just for the fear of hell, and maybe not at all for the fear of hell, but because it is good in itself, or because it is something that might bring you closer to God. In Islam, there is just essentially the fear of hell and the fear of earthly punishment. And there isn't any concept in traditional Islam outside of the Sufis of love for God or union with God or anything of the kind. So what you have is people who are afraid because they don't steal. You know, you can go to Saudi Arabia. I knew this guy, he worked there for several years, and he said it was amazing. There would be these jeweler shops with these diamond rings and things worth thousands of dollars. And they would just leave their shops open and go to prayers when they would start calling for the prayers. And he would say, you know, that was so wonderful. But it wasn't really that all the Saudis thought, you know, stealing is wrong and stealing is something that infringes upon the rights of my neighbor who I should love. They didn't think that at all. They just thought, I'll get my hand chopped off, and so I won't steal. I'll get stoned to death, so I won't commit adultery. I will not do this or that because of these other earthly punishments for it. And so they're just afraid. It's not morality, it's fear. And much more when you think about, especially when it comes to sexual morality, then you're talking about polygamy, about the temporary wives that are in Shiite Islam, about the sex slaves that are the spoils of war, that the Quran specifies that can be taken and used in this way. The Quran says this. That's not morality. That's just institutionalized immorality.
Cool. Question from Joshua Holtz. What's up, man? It says, why is the Western world so accepting of Islam? I have a theory, but I'm not sure if it's right. It's just my thoughts. I noticed that a lot of, kind of like the more liberal parties and stuff in the Western culture tend to try to side with views that they believe are persecuted or a minority or something like that. That's the aspect that seems to run through a lot of these different groups that they support. Not sure how accurate that is. That's just a simple observation. But what do you think?
Well, absolutely, John. That it's the Muslim groups in the West have very skillfully portrayed themselves as victims of harassment and discrimination and racism. And there's a whole industry of fake hate crimes that support all that because they don't have enough real hate crimes. So they make fake hate crimes, which are really quite common, that Muslims claim that they have been victimized by vicious Islamophobes, and it turns out they made the whole thing up. Now, the reason why is because, yes, victimhood nowadays is currency, and it'll get you power in this society. And also, I think that there are people on the left particularly who believe that the whole idea of ethnicity, of nationhood, of the nation state is wrong in itself, and that's the source of all of our troubles. And if we get rid of all that, then everything will be fine. So we bring in all these Muslim migrants because that will make every place pretty much like every other place, or it's in service of doing that. And so it's in service of their internationalist agenda.
Gotcha. So how much of of a minority. I mean, of a persecuted minority here. I mean, I'm thinking in relation to like, Jews or blacks. How do Muslims kind of line up with a lot of these groups?
Well, in the first place, FBI hate crime statistics are very illustrative in this case. Very important for people to know that in the first place, racial hate crimes are far more common than religious ones.
I would think so. Right?
And then when you get to the religious category, hate crimes against Jews are twice more common than against Muslims. And so when you think about how much you hear about hate crimes against Muslims versus how much you hear about hate crimes against Jews, it shows you how much the Islamic advocacy groups in the U.S. are exploiting these hate crimes in order to gain political power.
Yeah. You see, well, and that's what's interesting, because I remember listening to Brett Kunkle or maybe Sean McDowell, one of them, were talking about how they said that a lot of people would say like Christians are super intolerant towards homosexuals and all this, and they terrorize these people and this and that. And he said this was even within the church. And then he asked the whole group, he said, because a lot of them were saying this in the group. And then he said, well, how many of you have personally witnessed anything like this? I'm like, everybody's like, no. You know what I mean? They're like, well, has it happened to someone you know? And everybody's like, no. You know what I mean? And so it's one of these like rumors and kind of cliches that's really being, I guess, pushed out to culture.
Absolutely. Yeah.
All right. All right. Let's see. It's so tough to read. Small.
Yes. Getting old.
Okay. Is there solid evidence of Islam connecting with paganism? How we prove it all?
Oh, hey, let's deal with this.
Yep.
What do you think is correct? A, hyperliteral interpretation like the Salafis, or B, hypersymbolic interpretation like the Sufis? And is Quran, in a sense, symbolic? Okay, well, you can say anything is symbolic if you want to. You can read any book like that and say this stands for this and that stands for that. But it's important to bear something in mind, and that is that the Sufis, contrary to myth, do not reject violent jihad. Al-Ghazali, the founding figure of the Sufis, is very strong in saying that the Sufis have to fight against the infidels and subjugate them and make them into dhimmis and so on. And the Sufis were the leaders of the jihad in Chechnya against the Russians from the early 1800s until the middle of the 20th century, when the Saudi Wahhabis came in and took over. And the Muslim Brotherhood founder, Hassan al-Banna, prescribed spiritual exercises from the Sufis for the early Muslim brothers. And the Muslim Brotherhood was always about jihad and restoring the caliphate. So when you think about the allegorical spiritual interpretation that the Sufis employ, it does not negate or cancel or deny the literal interpretation that the Salafis stick to. It only just builds up upon it. The Sufis are no more a sect that teaches peace than any other sect of Islam. Well, they're not really a sect, but you understand. The Sufi order within Islam, there are Sufis all over in and among the other sects. It does not teach peace any more than classic Sunni Islam or Shiite Islam do.
Okay. Let's see what else we have here. Recently, okay. This is a little bit of a different question from Andrew. It says, I've recently heard J. Warner Wallace say that we don't need another apologist, but we need sheepdogs to protect the flock. Do you agree with that? For what I remember of J. Warner Wallace saying is that we don't need another $1 million apologist. We need more $1 apologists. And with that, I completely agree. I don't think that everybody needs to try to be the next William Lane Craig or James White or whoever. I think that instead we need people to start working together, and we need more people on the ground, you know what I mean, instead of everybody trying to be up in academia, because the truth of the matter is people are being more influenced by groundwork. It's like some of these reality shows and, kind of that in some ways than just pure academia all the time. So we need to have both, right? And so that's why I completely agree with J. Warner Wallace on that point.
Why do Muslims make the claim that only uneducated men join jihadist groups? But in reality, men like Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi has a PhD in Islamic studies. It's just more war is deceit. Muhammad said war is deceit. And it's a big enterprise in the West to make people think that it's only just a few extremists, a few idiots who don't have any education and they don't have any opportunities. And so they join these jihad groups, and they gloss over the fact that al-Baghdadi has the PhD in Islamic studies. Osama bin Laden was not some rube. He was very wealthy and very well educated. So is Zawahiri, the leader of al-Qaeda now. And there were many, many others. I have a running tally, a running thread at Jihad Watch of people who say, I joined ISIS because I read the Quran, because my Quran study led me to it, and so on. And those are the stories. Of course, people don't want you, the Islamic groups in the West don't want you to know about those stories, because then it will get people asking questions about why these immigration policies are in place, why people are against the travel bans that the president has tried to impose, and so on, because they don't want people being aware of what's in the Quran and what it can lead to.
What about this kind of superficial claim that all religions have their extremists, and the Quran just has extremists? And Islam has their extremists. What makes Islam different in this case than some of the other religions?
Well, John, there have been 30,000 jihad attacks around the world since 9/11. Yeah. And that means every one of those, every one, without exception, was sanctioned by a Muslim cleric, was incited by the Quran, and was justified by its perpetrators by reference to the teachings of Islam. Mm. This is not really something that's in a matter that's in doubt. There are a lot of efforts, as we just were discussing, to say, oh, these people don't really have any education. But every time we have records of what they do, then we see those things recurringly, that it's justified by the Quran, it is something that comes out of a mosque, and so on. Now, the thing is, when you look at Christianity, Judaism, Hinduism, Buddhism, where's the comparable number of terror attacks? Right. When have you ever heard of somebody shouting Jesus is Lord and blowing himself up? Right. You know, it would be ludicrous. It would be it's out of the question. Yeah. But we always frequently hear about people screaming Allahu Akbar and blowing themselves up because the teachings are different.
Yeah, exactly. And so even if it is the case that everybody's just misunderstanding this, right? And Allah just did a really bad job of communicating this. The fact that so many people take this belief system to mean violence, you know what I mean? Could be a reflection of the book itself.
Why is that so many Muslims misunderstand Islam in exactly the same way?
Yeah, right.
30,000 Muslims from around the world, from 100 countries, went to Iraq and Syria to join ISIS. Yeah. Why did they all misunderstand Islam in the same way?
Right. Yeah.
It's ridiculous.
Yeah. Okay.
What do you think about the atrocities committed in the Old Testament compared with the Quran? The atrocities in the Old Testament are not marching orders. They do not say, go and do likewise. They do not tell all believers to act in the same way. They are very problematic that God would ever say, go and kill people. And that's something that Christian theologians have always wrestled with, and Jewish theologians as well. But the idea that they are to be imitated in any way, that's never been the case. Yeah. Whereas in the Quran, it is all over the place that you have Muslim scholars saying that the violent passages supersede the peaceful ones. And so there's no comparison, really.
Yeah, and I don't think anybody reading the Bible, right, if you read it straight through, I don't think you're going to come to the conclusion that, like, hey, I need to go kill unbelievers or anything like that, right? And so it's a little bit of my mom's texting me coming up on the computer.
Oh, hi, Mom. No, I was pointing at the Orthodox Syrian Christian because, do you think the Quran is full of Gnostic literature, such as that Christ crucifixion narrative being replaced and another, like the 2nd century Gnostic gospel, the Great Seth? Yeah, that caught my eye, even though I'm having a little trouble reading it. The 3rd century Gnostic gospel. Anyway, fact is, back in 1982 or 3, way before any of you were born, that was my first paper on Islam, was about just that, how the Quran was influenced by Gnostic literature, as evidenced by the idea that Jesus only seemed to be crucified and it was really somebody else. as in the second treatise of the Great Seth, the Gnostic writing. And the fact is that the Byzantine Empire was a Christian empire, and there were no parliaments, there were no constitutions in those days, and what kept the empire together was the common religion. So everybody in the empire was expected to be not only a Christian, but a particular kind of Christian, an Orthodox Christian. And so the unorthodox Christians, like the Gnostics, left the empire in many cases because they faced various kinds of discrimination. And so a lot of them went to Arabia, and a lot of them went to the areas around there in Iraq and Syria, which is really where Islam developed. And so, yes, absolutely, there is a very clear connection between the Gnostic idea of the crucifixion and that which is in the Quran, and takes me back to the old days. Very first thing I ever wrote about Islam.
Interesting. David says, I have 5 minutes to talk to a Muslim and point them towards the gospel of Jesus. What is my strongest point of comparison between Islam and Christianity that points to Jesus being Lord?
Surah 10, 94 and 95, where Muhammad is told by Allah to ask the people who got the book before him if what he is saying is true. And in chapter 5, I believe it's 64 of the Quran, but it's right around there if it's not 64. It says that if the Christians had kept to the gospel, they would have been all right. And so you show the Muslim list Muhammad could have been referring to in the Quran, because after all, what are we supposed to believe? That Muhammad is sending them a gospel that doesn't exist? I mean, that Allah is sending Muhammad to check a gospel that's been corrupted? So it must have been uncorrupted at Muhammad's time. And if that's the case, when has it been corrupted? We have manuscripts that go back before Muhammad's time that are the same as what we got now. So there's no corruption.
I love that point. That's a good point. And it says, did you decide if Robert dies in the new project yet? Yes, we did. But I'm not going to tell you guys. We're gonna let the suspense roll a little bit, but it's gonna be really dope. I love the scenes that we got with him too, and we have a special guest also that we're not going to mention by name yet. That's also going to be in it too. That's going to blow everybody's minds. It's going to be a really cool skit.
It's going to be a great show.
It is. We actually haven't really slept. I mean, he has. I guess he David, and
I could use some more.
yeah. There you go. Me, David, and Vocab, and some of the camera guys too. We've literally we're going off of 2 hours of sleep last night. We've been nonstop, and we went to bed about 4 a.m. Got up at 6, headed down, started shooting again, and I am drained. But it's all going to be worth it. I hope. I'm just hoping that we can get all these things done, but I think it's looking good so far. So we'll see. All right, let's see. I'll just take a couple more, and then we're going to go down and start working back on the video. Let's see. You say you're making them nervous of that laugh.
You have every reason to be nervous.
Yeah. All right. Let's see. Anything else? Come on.
Muhammad's laugh. Oh, what a thing to say.
You Islamophobe.
Yes.
When will your next Q&A be? We may be doing one on David Wish's channel tonight again, pending. So for those that didn't know, and before I forget, for my Patreons, I was going to be doing a live chat with some of the $5 tiers with Wood and a few other people. But I'm sorry, we got so slammed that I wasn't able to do it. But I promise you, I will make it up to you, and we will do something really good. But I'll still, when I get back home, if I don't have time to do it while I'm up here, I'll still do a live chat and get to know you guys and stuff like that. So I really appreciate all the support on Patreon as well too. You guys are awesome. Okay, we're going to take a couple more, and then we're going to get done here. Did Muhammad have orange hair?
Yeah, he really did.
What? I thought that was a
It's
joke.
in the Hadith. And you see sometimes, especially for years I lived in New York City, and I'd see these guys on the streets with their beards orange. And you know that guy's hardcore. He's a true believer because he's imitating Muhammad.
That's super funny. Is there any verses in the Quran that says jihad is fighting for peace and justice?
Nary one.
What's that?
Nary a one.
Oh, okay. All right. What would be the biggest objection to Islam from a Christian perspective?
Well, how about this? Woe to those who call good evil and evil good. How about this? There will come a time when men will kill you and think they're offering service to God. Both of those, I think, sum up Islam real well. You have people thinking that they are serving God by doing evil and killing people and destroying people's lives and enslaving people and so on. And they think that they're good and righteous in doing that, which is destroying their own souls.
You know, that actually leads me to, I think, an interesting question. For you, what is the reason why you do what you do?
Well, it's right there, really, that this destroys people. This is something that's bad for people.
Yeah.
It's bad for human beings. And I'm just trying to wake people up to that reality so that maybe some people's lives will not be destroyed.
That's good. And what's interesting about this is you've had a few attempts on your life.
Yes.
Yeah. And so you put your life out there too. And you know, and Wood does, and you know, we all are with all this stuff we're doing and all that. But for you, is it worth it for you to sacrifice, even if it came to the point where you're sacrificing yourself to get the truth out? Is that worth the cost to you?
Oh, of course. I mean, look, it's not as if I'm going to live forever if I don't do this.
Right.
And I don't see how people whose lives are just all about making money or you know, and amassing pleasures and various things. It's pointless. You're still going to end up dead. I would rather have tried to leave the world a little bit better than when I got here.
Absolutely.
I'm not sure I'm gonna, but nonetheless.
No, absolutely. And they, Muslims always say that you're doing this all for the money.
Yeah, I got so much money too. You know, it's amazing. They really believe that.
I know. They say it about me too.
I had this guy recently, and he and I have been talking for a long time, and he left Islam. Mm-hmm. And one of the first things after that, he said he's having a little trouble, and can I give him some money? As if I got money, because they believe their stuff about how I'm just crazy rich. But unfortunately, it's fabricated.
Yeah, absolutely. And for clarity too, because a lot of people always misunderstand this point. Are you saying that all Muslims are violent and evil?
No. Not all Muslims are violent and not all Muslims are evil.
Yeah.
It's the ones who can point to their book and say, this is why we are violent and why we are what you think of as evil. And that's the problem, that it keeps on inspiring people to do evil things.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Well, guys, we are just about out of time. Appreciate everybody for joining in on the live chat. Sorry, now more people are just hopping on, and there's a whole lot of comments coming in now. So sorry, guys. We're going to have to wrap it up. But keep an eye out on David Wood's channel. If we're able to do that, we may hop on that channel and do a little bit more here in a little while. The
Sahih Hadith are all fabricated. They all come from the 9th century. There's nary a one that is historically reliable.
And what about Quran-only Muslims? Sorry.
Quran-only Muslims are incoherent. Okay. The Quran tells you repeatedly, like 12 or 15 times, to obey Muhammad. How are you going to obey Muhammad? He's only mentioned by name 4 times in the Quran. How can you possibly obey Muhammad unless you know what Muhammad said to do? And that's in the Hadith.
Interesting. I had a friend tell me earlier that the Quran doesn't say to imitate the behavior of Muhammad or something. It
certainly
like that.
Does.
Yeah, he says that it says one verse, but that's only was for that specific time period or something.
Yeah,
like
we always hear that anything that's inconvenient, we always hear, oh, that was only for a specific time. And then the next day, they will say the Quran is valid for all time and is the perfect book that will give you the guide to living. Yeah. And then like half of it we're supposed to believe only applied to the 7th century, even though it's this eternal book that is applicable to all time. It's just a patently dishonest argument.
Right. Yeah, see. All right. I appreciate your time, Robert. And thank you guys all for joining the chat. And we will talk to you guys soon.
Thank you very much.
Oh, wait, you got to say... what do you mean?
What do you mean?
See you guys.